Your eyes open to the gray blush of a sky just before sunrise, and the air feels different here. Cool and faintly damp with the scent of morning dew. There is no rumble of traffic, no hum of electricity, only a soft chorus of clucking hens, and the occasional bleat of a goat. The ground beneath you is uneven, cool cobblestones, pressing gently through the worn leather soles of your shoes. Or perhaps they are not your shoes at all. Perhaps they belong to whoever you are. Here, the stones are slick from the night air and their edges rounded from years of countless feet passing this way somewhere. A shutter creaks open, and the soft thud of wood meeting wood drifts into the street. You hear the shuffle of fabric, someone wrapping themselves in a cloak before stepping outside. There is a moment where the whole village seems to stretch awake. A rooster makes a half-hearted crow, as if also not quite ready for the day. The houses are timber and wattle, their frames leaning slightly as though they have been in polite conversation for centuries. The roofs sag under the weight of thatch darkened by rain and time. You notice the faint smell of hearth smoke already curling into the morning air. Someone has lit their fire early, likely to bake bread or warm water for washing. In the medieval world, the day begins with the light itself because there is no choice. There are no switches, no alarms, only the steady certainty that work waits and sunlight will nod as you walk along the stones. Your feet splash in shallow puddles left by last night's rain. A small cart creaks by, drawn by a single sleepy donkey. The driver nods to you, though you suspect they have no idea who you are. Perhaps in a village like this no one ever truly needs to ask. It is said that many medieval towns had streets so narrow that neighbors could pass a loaf of bread through facing windows, and here you can almost imagine it leaning out to greet someone with warm crusts, still steaming. The air is cool enough that you can see your breath for a moment before it disappears into the haze. Cat pads across your path, pausing only to give you an appraising look before continuing toward a doorway so small you are not sure even the cat will fit inside one. House. You glimpse a dim interior lit only by the faint glow of a small fire. Shadows stretch tall and bend over walls like old branches. The scent of peat lingers here, mixed with something earthy perhaps. Herbs hung to dry. The cobblestones lead you toward the center of the village, where the sound of running water joins the quiet morning symphony. In many places during the Middle Ages, streets were often designed to slope toward a central drain or channel to carry away waste and water. But here the channel seems almost too clean. Perhaps rain has done the work for them overnight. Man walks past carrying a bundle of sticks tied with rough cord. He whistles a tune that meanders slowly, as though the song is in no hurry to be anywhere. You feel the slowness seep into you. To the pace of life here is not measured in minutes, but in the simple certainty of tasks. Your eyes wander to the sky again. It is lighter now, a pale blue, unfurling above the rooftops. A pair of swallows dart and loop overhead, one chasing the other, in a game that might be courtship or simply breakfast hunting. Your ears pick up a low murmur of voices somewhere behind you. A woman is speaking to someone unseen, perhaps a child, her words soft but clipped, in the rhythm of work, talk not conversation. The smell of fresh hay drifts from somewhere nearby, and your mind notes how every scent here has a weight and clarity to it. There is no background hum of modern life to blur the edges of perception, only what is here and what is not. To pause at a corner where the stones dip sharply, as if the ground itself has grown tired over the years. A narrow alley veers off between two buildings, so close you could stretch out both arms and brush the walls. Your curiosity hums faintly, but you choose to keep to the wider street, drawn onward by the gentle pull of sound and smell. Fact flickers to mind that in some medieval towns the streets were not paved at all, but instead packed with earth, straw, and whatever else was trampled in during the day. Here, though, someone once took the effort to set each stone by hand, an act of care that endures. Beneath your feet centuries later you pass a doorway, where a rough curtain of woven reeds stirs slightly. In the breeze from within comes the muffled clink of pottery, and the faint sound of humming, a kind of private music made only for the person singing. You wonder briefly if centuries from now, anyone will ever notice the way you breathe in this Moment the light shifts again, softer and yet brighter as the sun reaches over the horizon. A golden wash begins to spill down the line of rooftops, catching on every damp tile and glinting on window glass that is not quite clear. A few windows here are covered instead with stretched parchment, thin enough to admit light, thick enough to keep out the wind somewhere. A dog barks not sharply, but with the sleepy announcement that the day has officially arrived. A cartwheel hits a rut with a hollow wooden thunk. The sound carries through the still, cool air. You keep walking, letting the cobblestones lead you without thinking about where they might go. There is a calm in not knowing, a quiet trust that the path will open when it needs to. The houses seem to tilt closer overhead for a moment, creating a kind of tunnel of shade, then lean apart again, revealing another stretch of soft light. Your shoulders loosen, your steps slow. The coolness of the morning wraps around you like a thin blanket before the warmth of day arrives. You draw in another breath, tasting faint wood smoke on the air and the distant promise of bread baking somewhere ahead. You breathe slower now. The scent reaches you before you see the source, warm, earthy, and sweet, with just a whisper of smoke in it. It winds through the narrow lanes, curling around corners, like it knows exactly where you are and refuses to let you go. Your feet seem to follow it on their own down the gentle slope, toward a squat timbered building with a low thatched roof. A small wooden sign hangs above the doorway, carved with something you cannot quite make out, though. The shape of a round loaf is unmistakable. The baker is already at work. You can hear it, the soft, rhythmic thump of dough being worked on a heavy table inside. The air is thick and warm, a welcome wave against the lingering cool of the morning. The walls are dark from years of heat and smoke, and the glow from the clay oven pulses like the slow beat of a heart you take in. The sight of baskets lined along the wall, their contents still pale and waiting to be transformed. The smell is not just bread, but rye and barley, and a faint note of sourness from yesterday's starter. A young apprentice moves quickly from one task to another, dusting flour over a board, brushing crumbs away, checking the oven with a practiced squint. There is something hypnotic about their movements, each one part of a pattern repeated every day without question. In medieval villages, the baker's oven often served the whole community, as most homes did not have the fuel or the space for their own. This one feels like it has known the hands and faces of the same families for generations. Smoke escapes in lazy ribbons from the oven's vent, and you catch the sharper scent of burning wood, mingling with the softer bread aroma outside. Someone has begun chopping logs, the steady thunk of the axe keeping time with the quieter music of kneading. Within moments the baker slides a wooden peel beneath a round loaf, its crust already beginning to blister in the heat. The sound of it being set inside is like a gentle sigh. You step outside again, letting the smell follow you into the street. It clings to your clothes in a way that is almost comforting. Across the way, a small hut releases a different smoke scent, darker, sharper. This one comes from peat, being burned perhaps for a morning meal. You wonder if the two scents will meet in the air and have a polite conversation about whose turn it is to rule the village's attention. Today your feet lead you toward a small clearing where a single long bench sits against a wall patched with ivy. A man in a rough wool tunic sits there, tearing pieces from a loaf, steam rising from its torn edges. He dips them into a bowl of something thick and dark, perhaps a pottage made of beans and onions. The bread soaks it up greedily, and you almost hear it sigh in relief before disappearing into his mouth. He catches your glance and gestures toward the loaf, as if to offer a piece, but before you can answer, he goes back to eating as if the offer was more about courtesy than expectation. A cart rattles past, drawn by a pair of small sturdy horses. The driver has a sack slung over his shoulder from which the faint rattle of grain can be heard. In the Middle Ages, grain was both staple and currency, and bakers were careful keepers of it. Prices could change with the harvests, and there were even laws in some towns dictating the weight and quality of bread. Though, here in this quiet morning, none of that feels urgent, only the smell, the warmth, the promise of breakfast. From somewhere deeper in the village comes a thin, high whistle. You turn and spot a boy carrying a bundle of twigs, perhaps, for kindling. His feet are bare, and his pace unhurried, as if time is not something to be caught, but something that comes to you. When it is ready, he glances at you for a heartbeat, and then returns his gaze to the ground, studying the cobblestones as though they might offer him advice. You drift back toward the baker's hut, drawn once more by the rhythmic sound of the peels sliding in and out of the oven. The heat rolls out in gentle waves, and the smell has deepened into something almost intoxicating. Toasted crust, warm grain, the faint mineral temps of the clay oven itself. It is said that bread in medieval Europe often had a coarser texture than what you might know today, bits of husk and grain, giving each bite a slight crunch, perhaps less refined, but more grounding. Something that makes you aware of the work behind. Every mouthful. Small girl darts past you, carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle that radiates heat. She must be taking her family's dough to the baker to be cooked, a practice that saved both wood and space in their own home. She moves quickly, as though afraid the warmth might escape if she lingers too long. You watch her vanish into the dim doorway, greeted by the baker with a nod that speaks of long familiarity. Somewhere nearby, the faint sound of a lute drifts through the air, its notes slow and wandering, as if testing which way the wind might carry them. They mingle with the smell of bread and smoke, creating something that feels like a memory, even if you have never lived it before. The lute stops for a moment, then begins again, this time with a tune that almost sounds like a lullaby meant for the bread itself. You lean against the side of the building, feeling the rough timber against your back. The sun has climbed higher now, and its warmth blends with the oven's breath, wrapping you in a lazy comfort. A few sparrows hop along the roof, pecking at stray crumbs that have somehow found their way up there. One of them tilts its head at you, before fluttering off, as if to check on some urgent business. Elsewhere, eyes grow heavy in the stillness. The steady rhythm of the baker's work, the smell of warm bread, the soft drift of lute music, all seem to press down gently, like a thick quilt. The smoke from the oven curls upward and disappears into the pale blue sky, and you find your thoughts doing the same, drifting higher until they blur into nothing but quiet. The candle of morning burns slowly here, and you let yourself breathe in its warmth. The scent of bread lingers on your clothes and in your hair, as if determined to follow you into whatever moment comes. Next, you breathe slower now. The path from the baker's hut curves gently toward the center of the village, where the ground dips just enough for water to gather. You hear it before you see it, the soft ripple and splash of a rope slipping against a wooden bucket. The well stands in the middle of a small square, its stones worn smooth from centuries of hands leaning, pressing, pulling the air. Here is cooler, as if the water beneath your feet breathes its own slow sigh into the morning. A woman in a heavy linen gown leans over the circular lip of the well, her hands working the rope. Hand over hand, the bucket rises slowly, its sides dripping clear droplets that sparkle briefly in the sunlight before they vanish into the dust. At her feet beside her, a younger girl holds two clay jugs, waiting patiently. The rope creaks with every pull, and the sound seems to echo faintly down into the dark water below. In the Middle Ages, a village well was more than a source of water. It was the quiet pulse of the community, the place where news and gossip traded hands as easily as buckets. The woman at the rope says something to the girl, who answers in a quick whisper, and both glance toward a narrow lane, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. You wonder if their words carry the day's first rumors, or just the small talk of weather and chores. An other figure approaches from across the square, a man with a wooden yoke balanced across his shoulders. To empty pails hang from its ends, knocking lightly against his legs. He greets the women with a nod, and they shuffle slightly to make space at the edge of the well. His movements are deliberate, unhurried. Every step, every gesture here seems to belong to a rhythm much older than you. You move closer and catch the faint mineral scent rising from the well. A cool, damp smell like stone after rain. The bucket comes up again, and The woman tips its contents into one of the girl's jugs. The sound is soft and satisfying, a small waterfall in miniature. A splash escapes and runs over the side, wetting the girl's hands. She shakes them briskly, before tucking the jug under her arm and turning to leave. A stray dog appears trotting into the square with the confident gait of someone who knows every smell and shadow in the village. It stops near the well, sniffing at the wet stones, then licks at a small puddle forming in a groove of the cobbles. Its tail wags lazily, perhaps in gratitude, perhaps just because there is nothing better to do at this hour. An older man now takes the rope, his hands veined and knotted from years of work. The rope slides through his palms. With the practiced ease of someone who has done this every day since childhood, he glances at you briefly, his eyes narrowing slightly before softening into something almost like recognition. Here strangers are not common, but neither are they met with hostility. People have their own lives, their own tasks, and if you are here to help, you will be welcomed in time. Somewhere in the background, a cart rolls past the far end of the square. The wheels send a faint vibration through the cobblestones. Under your feet you watch it disappear between two buildings, and the square returns to its gentle sounds, the creak of rope, the splash of water, the murmur of quiet voices. A small boy arrives carrying a mug carved from wood. He waits at the side of the well, bouncing slightly on his toes. The older man dips the bucket and pours just enough into the mug for the boy to drink. A little runs down his chin, but he wipes it away with the back of his hand, grinning as if this is the finest drink in the world, and perhaps it is. In this time, clean, cool water is no small gift. You notice how the stones around the well are darker here than elsewhere in the square, dampened from years of spills and splashes. Some are even indented, where countless feet have stood. The grooves in the wood of the bucket's handles speak of decades of touch. Each detail feels like a quiet record of everyone who has been here. There is a scholarly debate about whether some village wells were originally Roman in construction, later maintained and built upon by medieval hands. Looking at this one, you can almost believe it has always been here, a constant witness as houses rose and fell, as children grew into adults and returned each morning to draw the same water their parents once carried. A gust of wind drifts through the square, lifting the hem of a woman's skirt and rattling the ivy against a nearby wall. The sound mingles with the faint drip of water still trailing from the bucket. The sun is higher now, spilling a warm glow over the rough timber beams of the houses around you. The smell of baking bread from the baker's hut still lingers, carried gently on the breeze to mix with the scent of the well's cool air. A group of women arrive. Together their chatter, low but steady. They place their buckets in a loose line along the well's edge and begin drawing in turn, pausing between pulls to speak of who married whom, who might be sick, who saw a fox near the henhouse last night. Their words rise and fall like waves lapping against the shore. You stand just far enough away that their language is more music than meaning, a sound that fills the space between the splashes and cricks. You watch as one of the women finishes filling her pails and then lifts the yoke to her shoulders. She steps carefully at first, testing the balance, before setting off toward the lane. The water sloshes faintly with each step, and you find yourself walking in rhythm with its sway. The dog follows her for a few paces, before deciding the square is still the better place to bait. Air here feels heavier now, with the mingled scents of water, earth, and wood smoke. Yet it is not oppressive. It is grounding, steady, the kind of air that makes you think perhaps nothing bad could happen here. Not while the well still gives, and the square still hums with morning voices. Cloud drifts slowly across the sun, softening the light into a silver glow. The ripples in the buckets shimmer faintly like liquid glass. You catch yourself staring into them longer than you intended. The surface trembles with every shift of the rope, each movement distorting your reflection until it becomes something else entirely. You step back from the edge, letting someone else take your place. The square seems to breathe around you, the quiet tasks continuing as they have always done. A new bucket dips into the dark and rises again, spilling cool brightness into waiting hands. The cycle repeats, and you feel yourself matching its pace. You breathe slower now, The sound of voices grows louder as you follow the curve of the street away from the well. The houses here stand a little farther apart, giving space for stalls to spill out into the lane. The air is a blend of smells, both inviting and questionable. Fresh herbs, sharp vinegar, a hint of something fishy that may or may not have come from the river. The morning sun strikes the roofs at an angle, turning the thatch golden and sending long shadows across the cobblestones. Low wooden table is covered in rough cloth and stacked with carrots, their ends still clinging to clumps of earth. Beside them, a basket of onions, the skins flaking like old parchment. The woman behind the table has a kerchief tied snug around her head. She calls out to passers-by with the rhythm of someone who has been repeating the same phrases for years, offering roots at a fair price. Though what exactly is fair? Here is open to interpretation. 2 stalls down, a man stands behind a collection of cheeses, arranged in uneven wheels. Their surfaces are mottled and cracked, their smells complex enough to make you pause. Some are pale and soft, others firm and tinged with blue. He cuts a slice from one and holds it out with a grin. There is a faint twinkle in his eye that suggests he knows this is a test. Either you love it, or you regret every decision that brought you here. Medieval markets were often the heart of a town, drawing traders, farmers, and craftsmen from the surrounding countryside. People came not just to buy and sell, but to hear news, to arrange work, to see faces they might otherwise miss for weeks. You can feel that hum here, each voice overlapping another, creating a steady murmur that wraps around the square like a warm blanket of human sound. On the far side of the market, a tall man leans over a table covered in bolts of wool in shades of cream brown and gray. He runs the cloth through his hands in long, slow motions, letting customers see the tight weave and perhaps imagine the cloak or tunic it might become. The wool smells faintly of lanolin, a reminder of the sheep it once covered. Behind him, a small boy dozes against a sack, his head bobbing with each slow breath. A gust of wind stirs through, carrying with it the sharper scent of dried fish. You turn to see them hanging in neat rows, their scales dulled by salt and thyme. They sway slightly in the breeze, each one tied by the tail to a length of twine. A woman in a heavy apron rearranges them with a hooked stick, her expression unreadable. Perhaps she is thinking of her own supper, or perhaps she is simply calculating the best way to display them so they catch the eye without catching the nose too strongly. Somewhere nearby, someone has set out a small pile of apples, bright and waxy. Their color stands out against the muted tones of the market. A young man bites into one with a loud crunch, and for a moment, the sound cuts through the rest of the noise, drawing your own mouth into an unconscious smile. You can almost taste the sharp, sweet juice yourself. There is a small commotion near the far edge of the market, where a chicken has apparently decided to stage an escape. It darts between legs, feathers ruffling in indignation, as a red-faced boy gives chase. The laughter that follows rolls through the air, easing the business-like mood of the morning. Even the cheese seller pauses to watch before returning to his work. In some medieval towns, markets were regulated by law, with set days and designated spaces for certain goods. Bakers here, wool there, fish over there. This market, however, feels more fluid, more shaped by habit than by rule. Stalls lean into one another and sometimes overlap altogether. You wonder if certain spots have been claimed by the same family for generations. The right to stand here passed down alongside recipes and trade secrets. You pause by a small table laden with pottery, bowls, jugs, and plates in simple shapes, their clay surfaces painted in quiet, earthy tones. The potter himself sits nearby, turning a small piece of clay in his hands, as if unable to stop even while selling. His fingers move with unconscious precision, shaping something that may, one day, sit on a table like the ones before you. You notice a jug with a tiny chip at its rim, and think about how many hands will hold it before that chip grows into a story worth telling. The sun has climbed higher now, and the air is warmer. Stalls that were still in shadow when you arrived now glow softly in the light. Dust motes dance lazily above the cobblestones, stirred by the shuffle of feet and the brushing of skirts. A dog wanders between stalls, its nose twitching at the smells though its pace is unhurried, perhaps waiting for a friendly hand to drop. Something edibly man selling herbs calls to you, lifting bunches of rosemary, thyme and sage from his table. The leaves are bright and fragrant, and when you lean closer, the scent is almost dizzying. He tells you they will keep meat from spoiling. Longer though, whether this is entirely true, or just a well-worn sales line you cannot say. Still, you imagine them hanging to dry in the warm rafters of a kitchen, their smell mingling with wood smoke and cooking broth. Your eyes wander upward for a moment to the rooftops where pigeons gather in small clusters. They murmur to one another with soft coos, their heads bobbing rhythmically. Every now and then one takes flight, its wings flashing briefly in the sun before disappearing over the eaves. The cheese seller catches your glance again and tilts his head toward the small wedge still waiting on his table, as if daring you to accept. His grin widens when you step closer. You take the piece and bite. The taste is strong, earthy, and a little wild, and for a moment the market around you fades into a blur of sound and color, only the cheese existing fully in your mind. You swallow, and the noise rushes back in the bargaining, the footsteps, the laughter of children darting between stalls somewhere. A bell tolls slowly, pulling the hour into focus. Conversations pause just long enough to acknowledge it, then flow on again. You take one last look at the line of stalls, the vegetables, the fish, the wool, and the pottery before stepping back into the main street. The market continues behind you, a steady heartbeat of the village. You breathe slower now. The bell rings again, and the sound rolls slowly through the air, like a deep breath exhaled by the whole village. It is not hurried or sharp. Each tone lingers, hanging in the space between the houses before melting into the next. You turn toward the sound and see the small stone chapel standing at the end of a gentle slope. Its walls are pale in the sunlight, though you can see patches of moss clinging stubbornly between the stones. The roof is steep and dark, and the cross at its peak leans just slightly, as though even it has grown a little weary over the years. The closer you walk, the more the bell's vibration hums through the ground. Beneath your feet the path is lined with a low wall, built from rough stones gathered from the surrounding fields. They are uneven and worn, their edges softened by rain, wind, and countless hands. You pass through a wooden gate that swings inward, with a long creek revealing a small yard, where a few villagers stand already, their heads tilted toward the sound. The bell hangs in a squat tower just above the entrance, and its rope swings gently with each pull. A boy no older than 12 stands inside, tugging at it with both hands, his small frame rising slightly with every downward pull. His face is set in concentration and perhaps a bit of pride. It is no small thing to be trusted with calling the village together. Few people file past you into the chapel, nodding in quiet greeting. The doorway is narrow and low, forcing you to duck slightly. As you step inside, the air shifts, instantly cooler, shaded from the sun and tinged with the faint smell of wax and old stone. The light here comes in thin beams through small arched windows, some filled with colored glass in simple patterns of red and blue, others left plain so the pale daylight falls unfiltered on the rough floor. In many medieval villages, the church or chapel was not only a place of worship, but the center of community life. It was where news might be shared, disputes settled, agreements made. The walls have heard as many bargains and confessions as prayers. Perhaps that is why even the air feels heavy with memory. Footsteps sound loud in the stillness. The floor is uneven beneath a scattering of rushes fresh enough to carry the scent of hay. A single candle burns on a small side altar, its flame bending slightly in the cool draft that seeps under the door. The benches are simple, rough planks, worn smooth in the middle from years of use. You run your fingers along the surface and feel the dip where countless hands have rested. The priest stands near the front, in a robe of plain wool, speaking softly with an older woman, who holds a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She nods at his words, and they part with a faint smile. He turns toward you for a brief moment, his gaze steady and calm. Before returning to his duties, he moves without hurry, his gestures careful, as though each one is part of an unspoken ritual somewhere high above you. The bell slows its tolling the gaps between each strike, widening until it stops entirely. The silence that follows is deep enough to make you aware of your own breath. In that stillness you hear the faint rustle of fabric, the scrape of a bench leg on stone, and a cough muffled quickly into a sleeve. You take a seat near the back where you can see both the doorway and the small altar. The sunlight through one of the colored windows falls in a patch of red across the floor, pooling like liquid against the gray. Stone dust motes drift lazily through it, their movement so slow it feels almost like they are choosing their path. There is a curious scholarly debate about how much of a medieval church service the average villager actually understood the Latin. Prayers were distant and formal, yet the gestures, the music, the rhythm of the gathering would have been deeply familiar. Here you can see how the space itself speaks its own language, one you do not need to translate. A woman near the front adjusts her headscarf and leans closer to her neighbor, whispering something that makes them both smile faintly. The sound is soft, but it cuts through the silence like the turning of a page. The priest begins to hum a low chant that swells gently in the air, not loud, not forceful, just steady enough to fill the corners of the room. It echoes faintly off the stone walls wrapping around you, until you can feel it in your chest more than you hear it too. Close your eyes for a moment, letting the hum wash over you. The cool air, the scent of wax, the flicker of shadow against stone, all seem to slow the world down to a single pace. The door creaks open briefly, and someone slips inside, bringing with them a burst of brighter light, before it closes again. You open your eyes. The priest is lighting a row of candles on the main altar. The tiny flames catch one after another, casting a warmer glow across the front of the chapel. Their light dances across the carved wood of the altar's edge, and for a moment it looks alive, moving in time with the slow chanty. Small boy near the doorway stifles a yawn, his mother placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The gesture is quick but tender, a reminder that for all its formality, the chapel is still part of everyday life here. Faith and routine are not separate things, but threads in the same cloth. The air inside begins to feel thicker, warmer, as the candles burn lower. The faint scent of incense joins the wax and stone, adding a note of spice that lingers in your nose. The chant fades into silence again, and the quiet is no longer heavy, but restful. You stand and step back toward the doorway, letting the cooler outside air touch your face. The bell is silent now, the yard calm. A few villagers linger, speaking in low voices before drifting back toward the fields and market. The boy who rang the bell is leaning against the gate, looking very pleased with himself, as though he has completed the most important work in the world. The sound of the market is faint here, only a low murmur, carried by the wind. The sun rests warm on your shoulders, and somewhere in the distance you hear the cluck of a hen, followed by a faint laugh. You take one last look at the chapel, its stone walls quiet and watchful, before turning to follow the path downhill. You breathe slower now. You follow the slope of the path until the houses grow larger, and the air feels faintly different here. The sounds of the market fade, and a new rhythm takes their place, the clatter of boots on wooden boards, the thud of a door closing somewhere, the sharp call of a man giving orders. You emerge into a wide open yard, hemmed in by timber walls, and the tall gabled hall of the local lord. The yard smells of straw, earth, and animals. Chickens roam freely, pecking at the ground between boots that ignore them entirely. A pair of geese waddle with stern authority, as if patrolling their domain. A dog lies in the shade, chewing contentedly on something you choose not to identify. A stable stands open at one end, its roof low enough to keep the air cool. The smell of horses drifts from within, warm and grassy. In medieval times, a manor yard was both workplace and meeting ground, a small world within a world. Here servants move about in steady patterns, each one clearly knowing their role. A young boy carries a bundle of firewood toward the hall doors, balancing it against his chest with a grim determination. Behind him, a woman in a faded apron hauls 2 heavy pails of water, her steps slow but certain, her face is lined yet calm, the kind of expression earned from years of knowing exactly how long the day will be. The hall itself rises over the yard with thick beams darkened by age. The great doors are banded with iron, their hinges large enough to look permanent even to your modern eye. One stands ajar, letting out the faint smell of smoke and roasting meat. Somewhere inside someone is working over a fire, even though it is not yet midday. Cart stands near the side wall, its wheels caked with dried mud. The driver leans against it, speaking quietly with a man whose clothes are just a touch finer than the others, perhaps an overseer. Their voices are too low to catch, but their gestures suggest the slow dance of bargaining. Maybe it is grain, maybe wool, maybe something less ordinary you cannot tell, and somehow that makes the yard feel even more alive. Your attention is caught by the smithy at the far corner of the yard. The open front reveals a man in a leather apron hammering something on a small anvil. The sound rings out bright and clear, each strike measured and strong. The smell of hot metal drifts through the air, sharp enough to cut through even the scent of straw and chickens. His work is precise but unhurried, the kind of pace that comes from knowing this task has been done here for as long as anyone can remember. A goose strays too close to his workspace, and he waves it off without looking up. The goose hisses softly before stalking away. Clearly offended chickens scatter in its wake, and the yard briefly erupts into a flutter of feathers. Before settling again, the scene has a humor so quiet, you almost miss Ida. Historical note lingers in your mind that in many manners, the yard was more than just a place for chores. It was the physical heart of the estate, a stage for receiving visitors, hearing disputes, and displaying the quiet power of the Lord. The way this one is arranged, the openness of the space, the height of the hall, all speak to that layered purpose. You take a few steps toward the hall and pause near a water trough. A horse lowers its head to drink, sending ripples across the surface that catch the sunlight. The muscles in its neck move like slow waves under its coat. You reach out and brush its flank, feeling the warmth of living weight and the faint quiver of skin against a persistent fly from. Inside the hall comes the sound of laughter, low and rolling, followed by the scrape of a chair on stone. The smell of meat grows stronger, mingling now with something sweeter, maybe honey or mead. The doors are wide enough that you can glimpse the dim interior, heavy beams crossing under the high roof. Sunlight falls through a smoke hole in the center, catching in the drifting haze from the fire. A man in a short cloak steps out of the hall and pauses to speak to one of the servants. His voice carries more than the others, firm, but not unkind. His boots are polished, and the clasp at his shoulder gleams in the light. He notices you for only a moment before turning back to his conversation. The impression is not of rudeness but of a man who knows the day is already full and cannot be stretched further. The smith strikes again, the sound ringing like a slow heartbeat through the yard. A chicken hops onto the cartwheel and perches there, as though surveying the scene for itself. The geese have resumed their patrol, cutting a dignified path past the water trough and toward the open gate beyond. You can see the fields stretching toward the horizon, their edges softened by the midday haze. The boy with the firewood reappears, this time empty-handed. He wipes his brow with the back of his arm, leaving a streak of dust across his face, and then heads toward the stable, perhaps for another errand. His steps are lighter now, maybe because his arms are free, maybe because this is just the rhythm of his day. Somewhere overhead a swallow darts down into the yard, then up again, its wings catching the light in a sharp flash. You follow its path until it disappears behind the hall roof. The yard seems to exhale a little in its absence. Overseer finishes his quiet discussion with the cart driver and claps him on the shoulder. The driver mounts the cart and clicks his tongue at the horse, which starts forward with a gentle roll of wheels. The sound fades toward the open gate, leaving only the familiar music of yard life. The hammer, the geese, the rustle of straw, the faint breath of the horses. You take one more slow glance around at the hall. The smithy, the cart path, the small dance of people and animals moving through their necessary patterns. Each detail fits together, not as parts of a show, but as pieces of a life lived without hurry, without the idea that time could be waited. Sun hangs steady in the sky, and the air feels warmer now. You find a patch of shade near the wall, where ivy climbs lazily toward the roof. The stone behind you is cool, and the murmur of the yard becomes something like a lullaby repeating without beginning or end. You breathe slower now. You step away from the brightness of the manor yard and follow a narrow side path that winds between two low outbuildings. The air changes as you walk, growing cooler, quieter. The smell of straw and animals fades, replaced by something drier, sharper. The faint mineral temps of ink and the warm beeswax scent of candles ahead. A small doorway set into a plain stone wall stands open, just enough to let out a sliver of golden light inside. The room is hushed in a way that makes you slow your steps. Automatically, it is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of concentration. The kind that gathers in corners and clings to the edges of furniture, as if afraid to be disturbed. A handful of figures sit at long wooden tables, bent over sheets of parchment. Their shoulders are slightly hunched, their sleeves rolled carefully away from wrists. The only sounds are the faint scratch of quills on animal skin, and the occasional soft rustle as a page is turned. This is the scriptorium, a place where words are not just written, but built layer by layer. Each sheet of parchment is thick, smooth, and pale, made from treated sheepskin. Prepared carefully over days before it ever touched ink, the monks here dip their quills with slow precision into small pots, the black liquid shining briefly before being drawn into delicate lines across the paste. Air is dim, but not dark. Sunlight filters through narrow slit windows, high in the wall, casting pale stripes onto the tables below them. Beeswax candles burn with a steady glow, their flames barely moving in the stillness. Their scent is warm and faintly sweet, mingling with the dry smell of parchment. One monk pauses to sharpen his quill against a small knife. The sound, a soft whisper of blade on feather. He inspects the point closely before dipping it again. When he writes, his lips move slightly, as though tasting the words before committing them to the page. The letters curve in elegant loops, each stroke deliberate. In a world where most people will never hold a book, let alone read one, these words are as precious as gold. A curious fact lingers in your mind that medieval manuscripts often contained small mistakes, or even intentional jokes hidden in the margins. Little drawings of animals or tiny figures making faces tucked between lines, as if the scribe could not resist leaving a quiet fingerprint on the work. You glance at the pages here, but the ink is too fresh to uniform to reveal any secret mischief. In the corner of the room, a younger scribe grinds pigment with a pestle, the slow circular motion turning bright mineral powder into smooth paint. He works in silence, except for the occasional soft tap. As he scrapes the paste into a small dish, his colors will be used to decorate the larger capitals at the start of each section, bright flourishes to guide the reader's eye. You move slowly along the edge of the room, careful not to let your shadow fall across any work. The stone floor is cool underfoot, and the walls thick enough that the outside world feels far away. The market, the manor, the fields, all belong to another place, another pace. Here time moves with the slow, deliberate pull of a pen. Across a line, one of the older monks glances up briefly, meeting your gaze. His eyes are clear, but lined at the corners, as if the act of focusing so intently has carved its own marks on his face. He gives the faintest nod before lowering his gaze again to the page. In that small exchange, there is an understanding that this space is not for conversation, but for the steady, unbroken thread of work. A small shelf against the far wall holds finished pages stacked between wooden boards to keep them flat. Their edges are perfectly aligned, each one waiting to be bound into a larger whole. The smell here is deeper, somehow a mix of dried parchment, ink, and time itself. You run your hand lightly along the edge of the shelf, feeling the faint texture of the boards. Beneath your fingertips there is a gentle scrape of a chair, as one of the scribes stands and crosses to a chest near the wall. He lifts the lid slowly and withdraws a narrow strip of gold leaf so thin it moves with the smallest breath. He lays it carefully across a patch of damp paint, pressing it down with a soft cloth until it clings and catches the light for a moment. The room seems brighter, as if the gold has its own Small sun trapped inside the work here is patient to the point of stillness. A single page might take days sometimes. Weeks to complete each letter, a decision, each line, a measured journey. The thought comes to you that this room is less a workshop and more a garden of words, cultivated slowly and with quiet devotion. Outside, a bell tolls faintly, though not the chapel bell. This one smaller, lighter. Its sound drifts in through the slit windows, and a few of the scribes shift in their seats, perhaps marking the hour or the time for a short rest. Yet no one rises immediately. The pull of the page, the need to finish a line or complete a flourish keeps them anchored to their place as you let your gaze travel once more across the rows of bent heads. The steady hands, the gentle gleam of candlelight on ink before you leave. You notice a small scrap of parchment tucked near one monk's elbow. On it is a simple sketch of a bird, mid-flight, its wings spread wide, and lines so delicate they seem almost to move. Perhaps a bit of quiet rebellion, perhaps just a moment of play in the midst of labors. Stepping back into the doorway, the cooler air of the corridor brushes against your face. The sounds of the outside world return faintly, the cluck of hens somewhere, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer, yet the hush of the scriptorium still clings to you, as if it has settled into your skin. You breathe slower now. You leave the quiet dimness of the scriptorium and step back into daylight, blinking as the sun spills across your face. The air feels warmer out here, and carries with it the sense of open ground, fresh earth, and something faintly sweet carried on the breeze ahead. The village gives way to wide open space. Fields stretching gently toward the horizon in soft gold and green. The path beneath your feet narrows into a ribbon of packed earth, lined with tufts of grass on either side. Wheat sways in slow unison, the heads heavy with grain, bending slightly under their own weight. The movement is almost hypnotic, like a sea of gold, breathing in and out. Somewhere far off, you hear the faint creak of wood, a plow being pulled through the soil by a team of oxen. Their deep, steady snorts rise between the calls of a farmer, urging them forward. In medieval life, these fields were more than scenery, they were survival. Entire seasons turned on whether the harvest would be good or thin. A poor yield meant hunger for months. A good one meant safety through the winter. You feel the quiet weight of that reality in the way every movement here seems deliberate, from the measured sweep of a scythe to the careful binding of sheaves. A small footpath veers off to the side, and you follow it for a few paces until you find yourself near a cluster of workers, bent over rows of vegetables. Their hands move quickly, plucking weeds, checking the soil, patting it gently back into place. The smell here is richer, darker. The scent of freshly turned earth, mixed with the faint peppery note of crushed leaves. A young woman looks up briefly as you pass, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face before returning to her work. She hums softly under her breath, a tune that seems to match the rhythm of her hands. A crow calls overhead, its shadow sliding across the field like an arrow on the hunt. It lands on a post at the far edge and tilts its head as though inspecting the day's labor. In some places, boys were paid to walk the fields, clapping or rattling sticks to scare off such opportunists. You imagine the bird is weighing its chances before deciding the wheat is too well guarded. Today, beyond the workers, a narrow ditch runs between the fields, lined with reeds and dotted with small white flowers. The water moves slowly but steadily, carrying the reflection of the sky on its surface. Medieval fields often relied on such simple channels to keep the soil from flooding in wet weather, or to draw water closer in dry months. The ditch here seems both natural and carefully tended, as if the land and the people have agreed on its shape. A sudden breeze moves through, carrying the warm, dusty scent of grain. The stalks lean and whisper against one another, their sound a soft rustle that seems to settle into your chest. You pause for a moment simply to listen. The distant plow creaks again, the oxen shift their weight, and the farmer calls out once more, his voice long and drawn out over the open air. You follow the path toward the far side of the field, where a small wooden fence marks the boundary. Chickens wander near it, scratching at the dirt between tufts of grass. Their movements are quick, almost comical, but efficient. every scratch followed by a careful inspection for something worth eating. A boy sits nearby, carving at a stick with a small knife. He glances at you, and then at the chickens, as if silently, daring you to interrupt his work. The ground here is dotted with small piles of cut grain, bound into sheaves, with lengths of twine. Each bundle stands upright in a small pyramid to dry. Before being taken to the threshing floor, they lean into one another in a way that almost feels companionable, little clusters, waiting patiently for the next stage of their journey. Historical note comes to mind that harvest time in medieval villages was not just work, but also a kind of celebration. It was exhausting, backbreaking labor, but it brought the community together in a shared purpose. People sang in the fields, children carried water to the workers, and every completed row was a small victory against the uncertainty of the coming winter. Looking out over the waving wheat, you can almost hear those songs rising above the rustle of stalks. The sun climbs higher, and the warmth deepens. The light pools along the tops of the grain, giving them a faint glow. Insects hover lazily above the stalks, their wings catching the light in quick flashes. Somewhere nearby a grasshopper leaps and disappears into the gold without a sound. At the far end of the fence, a woman in a broad straw hat tips a bucket of water into a trough for a pair of goats. They drink greedily, their small beards dipping into the water with each mouthful. The smell of the animals drifts toward you, sharp but not unpleasant, a reminder that every part of this place is bound to the land. You lean against the fence for a moment, watching as the plow team turns at the end of the row. The farmer rests his hand briefly on one ox's flank, speaking to them in a low voice before setting them forward again. The wood groans, the soil parts, and the slow, steady work continues. A cloud moves across the sun, and the light shifts into something softer, the gold turning to muted amber. The wind picks up just enough to send another wave through the wheat. This time it carries a faint, distant sound, laughter drifting in from somewhere beyond the fields, perhaps from the village, perhaps from another group of workers hidden by the tall grain. It blends with the rustle until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. You take a deep breath, and the air tastes warm and dry, with a hint of dust from the path. The land here feels unhurried, timeless, as though it knows exactly what it is meant to do, and has no interest in doing it faster. The fields stretch out in every direction like pages in a book, written by the season itself. You follow the fence line until it meets another path that leads toward the edge of a wood. The trees rise in a slow green wall, their shade dark and inviting. After the brightness of the fields, the breeze carries the cooler scent of leaves and moss toward you, as if offering a place to rest from the sun. You breathe slower now. You step from the brightness of the open fields into the shadow of the trees, and the change feels immediate. The air is cooler, softer, and carries the faint scent of damp moss and fallen leaves. The light filters through the canopy above in narrow shifting ribbons, so that every step you take seems to pass through a different patch of gold or green. The ground beneath your feet is springy with old leaves and pine needles, and somewhere far above, a bird calls in a short, sharp burst before going quiet. Again, the path here is narrow, almost overgrown in places, and you have to brush aside ferns that lean lazily across it. Each movement sends a little shower of drops from yesterday's rain onto your hands and sleeves. The forest smells like stone after rain, like wood that has been here for centuries, quietly holding up the sky. It is the kind of smell that feels older than memory itself. You pass an oak so wide you would need for people to wrap their arms around it. Its bark is thick and deeply ridged, a map of time in rough gray lines near its roots. A mushroom cluster leans in the shade. Their pale caps look like tiny umbrellas left behind by travelers who moved on long ago. In the medieval world, mushrooms were a tricky business. Some were eaten gladly in stews, others avoided entirely, because no one wanted to risk a meal becoming a funeral. A squirrel appears on a low branch, watching you with dark eyes and the still intensity of a tax collector who suspects you are hiding grain. It flicks its tail once, and then scrambles up the trunk with a chatter that might be insult or just commentary. Either way, you take the hint and keep walking. The deeper you go, the quieter it becomes. Not silent exactly, but different. The hum of the village is gone, replaced by small sounds that seem magnified in the stillness. The snap of a twig somewhere to your right, the soft drip of water into a hidden pool, the slow sigh of wind through high branches. In medieval times, such woods were often sources of both fear and fascination. They were hunting grounds for the wealthy, full of deer and boar, but they were also places of stories whispered by the hearth tales of spirits, or hidden folk who might lead travelers astray. Your path crosses a shallow stream, where flat stones make a rough stepping trail. The water is clear enough that you can see pebbles resting on the bottom in shades of brown and gray. The current makes a soft murmuring sound as it winds around mossy roots. This could easily be a place where someone might stop to wash clothes or fill a jug centuries ago. Its usefulness as steady as the flow itself. And the far side, the ground rises a little, and the trees grow closer together. The light becomes dimmer and cooler. You catch sight of a small bird darting between the branches, a flash of yellow and brown before it disappears again in the distance. You think you hear a woodpecker tapping a slow, irregular beat on some hidden trunk. The sound is hollow and deep, carrying farther than you would expect. Every so often the path is marked by a pile of stones, perhaps left to guide the way, or perhaps just the result of someone clearing the land for planting further out. A fact you remember drifts through your mind that travelers in the medieval period often left such signs for one another, especially in unfamiliar woods, in places without signposts or maps. A small heap of stones could be the difference between finding your way and spending an unexpected night among the trees. A patch of sunlight opens ahead, like a stage spotlight, and you step into it, feeling its sudden warmth after so much shade. The forest floor here is dotted with wildflowers, their pale faces turned upward as though they have been waiting just for this moment. The air seems almost still, as if the world is pausing to enjoy the same patch of light you have found. From here, you can see a faint trail splitting off into the undergrowth. It is barely more than a suggestion of a path, just enough to make you wonder where it might lead, perhaps to a hidden clearing, or a charcoal burner's hut. Or maybe it simply disappears into bramble. You stay with the main trail instead, letting curiosity wait for another day. The sound of leaves rustling begins again, and this time you spot the cause. A small group of deer moves slowly through the undergrowth. On the slope above you, their ears flick in your direction, but they do not run. Instead, they step carefully, their hooves barely making a sound. Each one is lean and alert, their reddish coats blending almost perfectly with the shadowed trunks and patches of light. You watch until they vanish among the trees, their presence leaving a kind of calm in their wake. The path begins to slope downward now, the air cooling even more as you near another watercourse. This one is wider and slower, its surface reflecting the treetops in rippling green shapes. You hear the faint buzz of insects skimming across it, and somewhere a frog croaks in a low, steady rhythm. The medieval mind might have seen such a spot as a good place to camp for the night, close to fresh water, yet far enough from open ground to be hidden from strangers. You stand for a while just listening. The longer you remain still, the more sounds emerge. A faint trickle far upstream, the creak of wood as branches sway against each other, the almost inaudible patter of a pine cone falling through leaves. You feel your breathing slow without you meaning to match the pace of the place. The trail on the other side rises again, and beyond it you can see where the trees begin to thin, letting in more daylight. The woods have been both a passage and a pause, a stretch of quiet between one piece of the day and the next. You step forward, letting the shadows fall away, bit by bit, until you feel the sun on your face. Again the candle flickers low in your thoughts now. You follow the last stretch of the wooded path until it opens to a small lane lined with worn timber buildings. Their beams lean slightly as though they have been stretching toward each other over the years, trying to gossip across the road. The smell changes here, warm and rich, and a little smoky. The scent of something cooking drifts from a doorway, and underneath it is the sharper temps of ale brewing. Somewhere inside, You hear the muffled thump of a hand on a table, followed by laughter. You push open a heavy wooden door and step into the tavern. The air is warmer than outside, thick with the mingled smells of roasted meat, spiced broth, and the sweet malt of beer. Candles in iron holders throw soft pools of light across the rough tables. Their flames wobble gently each time someone passes by carrying a tray. The sound is a steady low hum, the murmur of voices layered over the clink of mugs, and the occasional burst of laughter from a corner. A man with a round face and a wool cap nods to you from behind the counter. His hands are busy wiping a mug with a cloth that may or may not be making it cleaner. He gestures toward the room as if to say, "Choose where you like," and goes back to his quiet work. You spot a small table tucked near the wall and slide onto the bench. The wood is smooth from years of elbows resting thereat. The next table, two men are in deep discussion about a cartwheel. One insists it broke because of poor wood. The other swears it was bad luck on the road. Medieval taverns were places where such debates unfolded with as much passion as any royal council, though here the stakes were smaller and the ale stronger. You can almost see the problem in your mind. A rutted track, a loud crack, the sigh of a long day getting longer. Serving woman stops by your table and sets down a mug without asking. The drink is warm in your hands, the scent nutty with a faint spice. This could be a local ale made from barley and flavored with herbs before hops became common. You take a slow sip and it is both bitter and strangely comforting. The kind of drink that makes you think of fires in the hearth and boots drying by the wall. From across the room, someone begins to hum a tune, not quite a song yet, but with the steady rhythm of something well remembered. A few others join in, at first softly, and then with more certainty. The melody turns into a work song you might have heard earlier in the fields, and now it is rolling through the tavern like a shared memory. The pace is slow enough that no one has to rush their drink to keep time. Man with a small harp steps into the center of the room and begins to play. The notes are light and quick, fluttering over the noise like sparks from a fire. In medieval times, musicians like this could travel from town to town, carrying not only songs but news from other places. They were walking messengers with a talent for turning the facts into something worth listening to. You wonder if this one's tales would sound as true in daylight as they do in this golden flicker of evening. The hearth at the far end is wide enough to stand in and holds a pot of something that smells like stew. The scent is thick with onions, carrots, and a darker note that might be venison. The heat from it rolls outward, wrapping you in the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones. A boy tends the fire, prodding the logs until a shower of sparks leaps up the chimney. He grins when one almost escapes into the room nearby. A group of travelers sits with their cloaks still on, talking quietly between spoonfuls of stew. Their boots are muddy and their eyes a little tired, but every now and then one of them leans back and laughs softly, as though the day has been forgiven. By the meal before long, they are pulling small items from their packs to trade with the innkeeper: a pouch of dried berries, a short length of dyed cloth, a piece of carved bone. The exchange is casual, a mix of barter and conversation. A historical curiosity comes to mind that taverns were often more than just places to drink. They were hubs of information where a stranger might hear about a new market in a nearby town, or the latest decision from a distant lord. You think of the two men still arguing over the cartwheel, and realize they might end up settling the matter with advice from someone 3 tables away, who has never even seen the cart. Your ale is half gone, and the room seems even warmer now. The chatter swells and fades like the tide. The harp shifts into a slower tune, one that feels almost like a lullaby. The serving woman brings another round to a group in the corner without spilling a drop. Despite the uneven floorboards in the back of the room, a small dog curls up beneath a bench, twitching now and then in its sleep. Perhaps it is chasing something in its dream, a rabbit, or maybe just the smell of the stew pot. Either way, it seems as much a fixture here as the old beams in the fire. The light outside the windows is fading into a deep blue, and the candle flames grow more pronounced in the dimness. Their reflections glint on the rims of mugs and in the eyes of people leaning in closer to speak. The room feels smaller now, not from crowding, but from the way the evening draws everyone toward the center where the music and warmth are strongest. Someone near the door opens it briefly, and the cool night air rushes in, carrying the smell of damp earth, and the faint sound of an owl far off. The door closes again, and the tavern exhales back into its cozy rhythm. You finish the last of your drinks, setting the mug down with a quiet thud. The sound is almost lost beneath the music and the soft talk, but it feels final in a small way. You sit for a moment longer, letting the warmth linger, and the hum of voices settle into the edges of your thoughts. The harp plays on the fire, crackles, the stew pot simmers. You rise slowly, the bench creaking under your weight, and make your way toward the door. The round-faced man nods again as you pass, and the night greets you with its cool, quiet air. You breathe slower now. You step away from the warm buzz of the tavern and into the cool quiet of the lane. The air feels fresher here, touched by the faint scent of damp hay and the sharper note of wood smoke curling from a nearby chimney. The sky is dark now, but not fully black. A pale wash of moonlight slides over the rooftops and turns the edges of the thatch silver. You follow the lane until it narrows to a small yard, where a ladder leans against the side of a barn-like building. The ladder creaks as you climb, your hands feeling the smooth polish of wood that has been gripped by many others before you. At the top you step into the loft. The air is warmer than outside, and thick with the scent of hay and old wood. Beneath it is the faint sheepish temps of wool from blankets folded neatly near a low cot. It is a scent that is somehow both comforting and a little scratchy on the nose. A single candle burns on a small wooden stool, casting a soft circle of light over the space. The flame sways faintly with the draft from the open hatch, and every time it does, shadows stretch long across the sloping rafters. The wood overhead is dark and heavy, the kind that seems to have been holding up the roof for longer than anyone can remember. In medieval times, loft spaces like this often doubled as sleeping quarters or storage for grain and dried herbs. It was practical to use every bit of space, especially where warmth from the animals below could drift upward on cold nights. You sit on the edge of the cot, feeling the straw mattress give under your weight. It rustles softly as though it is settling around you. The blanket is thick and a little rough, but it carries the steady smell of lanolin, the natural oil in wool. There is something reassuring about it, a sense that it has done its job through many winters. From below comes the slow sound of a cow shifting in its stall, followed by the faint snort of a horse. The noises rise up through the wooden floor in a muffled way, as if the building itself is humming to you. The loft feels separate from the village now. The chatter of the tavern and the clink of mugs is gone, replaced by the deep quiet of a place where nothing much happens, unless the wind decides to stir the hay. You glance around and notice bundles of dried herbs hanging from one of the beams. Their leaves are curled and papery, releasing a faint fragrance. When the air moves, mint, perhaps, or yarrow, both common in the medieval household for flavoring food or easing ailments. A small sack sits nearby, half filled with grain. Its drawstring is knotted in a way that suggests someone here knows how to keep out mice, though you suspect the mice might see it more as a polite challenge than a real barrier. From the far side of the loft comes the soft shuffle of something small. A cat emerges from the shadows, her coat the color of dust and smoke. She moves with the silent authority of someone who has lived here far longer than you will. She studies you for a moment, then hops up onto the cot, settling near your feet without asking. This is the medieval form of room service, and it comes with purring. Instead of a biltha, candle flickers again, sending a ripple of shadow over the rafters, and you notice a narrow slit of a window high on the wall. Through it you can see a shard of the night sky. A single star glimmers there, looking faint and far away. You imagine someone lying in this same spot hundreds of years ago, seeing that same star, perhaps wondering if it meant rain or good luck, or nothing at all. The medieval mind often read the sky like a book, even if the words were more feeling than fact. The air in here is still, but not heavy. Every so often a small draft slips through the hatch, bringing with it the cool smell of night. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and feel the texture catch slightly against your skin. It is not the softness of silk, but the honest warmth of something made by hand, spun on a wheel by someone who knew exactly how long a winter could be. The cat shifts and tucks her head under her paw. Her breathing is slow and steady, and you find yourself matching it without meaning to. Below, the animals settle into their own rhythms, hooves shifting now and then, a quiet chew of hay, the occasional sleepy sigh. In the absence of any hurry, the sounds become part of the stillnessy. Faint scratching sound comes from near the beam where the herbs hang. Maybe a mouse testing its courage, or a beetle tracing the grain of the wood in another place. It might be bothersome here. It feels like part of the fabric of the night, something small and ordinary enough to be ignored. You lie back fully now, your head sinking into the straw pillow. The candle's light paints the ceiling above in gold and shadow. You can just see the fine dust drifting in the air, catching the glow before it disappears into the dark corners. The sense of being tucked away from the rest of the world grows stronger. It is not isolation exactly, but the soft enclosure of walls that have seen too many seasons to be impressed by another. The thought drifts through your mind that lofts like this were places of quiet usefulness, not meant for grandeur, yet in their simplicity, they could be more comfortable than a drafty stone hall. You are close to the warmth of living things, surrounded by what you need and nothing more. Somewhere in the rafters, the wood creaks a slow, tired sound, as if settling into its own rest. The candle burns lowered the pool of wax around. Its base widening, you feel the pull of sleep in the same slow downward way a leaf sinks into still water. Outside, the village might still be alive with footsteps and voices, but up here, they are no more than distant murmurs. The cat shifts one last time, curling tighter as if sealing the space around you into a smaller, softer world. Your eyes begin to close though. You try to keep them open for just another moment to watch the way the candlelight dances over the beams, but the pull is steady, and soon the flicker becomes only a warm shape behind your eyelids. The candle flickers low, asterisk. You wake to a pale light, slipping through the small slit of the loft window. It is the kind of light that does not rush, but stretches in slowly, touching the edges of the hay and the beams overhead. The cat is gone now, leaving only the faint hollow where she had curled against you. From below comes the gentle stir of morning sounds, a soft snort from the horse, the creak of wood as someone moves through the stable, the quiet jingle of a harness being lifted from a peg. You sit up and wrap the wool blanket around your shoulders, letting its familiar scratch warm you. The air smells faintly of hay and fresh earth, the scent of the ground waking with the sun. The single candle from last night has burned to a puddle of wax, and the herbs above seem to glow faintly green in the new light. For a moment, you just breathe, taking in the slow rhythm of this place. Before the day fully begins, you climb down the ladder, your hands finding the same polished grooves in the wood. The stable below is dim and golden, with morning light sliding through the gaps in the planks. The animals watch you with the calm patience of creatures who have seen people pass through 1,000 mornings before this one. A hen struts between the stalls, scratching at the straw with the kind of confidence only a chicken can have. Stepping outside, you are greeted by the village wrapped in early light. The air is cool enough to make your breath mist, but soft enough to promise warmth later. Smoke curls lazily from a few chimneys carrying the smell of baking bread. Somewhere a bucket clatters as water is drawn from a well, and the sound rings against the quiet. People are beginning their day with a kind of unhurried certainty. A woman kneels to milk a goat, her hands moving with practiced ease while the goat chews on something invisible. 2 children chase each other down the lane, their laughter bouncing off the walls of timber houses in the medieval world. Mornings often started with chores, before the sun climbed too high, a time when the air was cool and the work felt lighter. You followed the lane toward the edge of the village, where the fields spread wide. The earth is damp beneath your feet, and the smell of it rises in the warming air. Rows of young shoots catch the light in delicate green lines, and in the distance, a man turns the soil with a wooden-handled plow, pulled by a patient ox. It is a scene both ordinary and deeply rooted in this world, where the pace of life is guided more by the sun than by any clock at the far end of the field. You find a small path that leads up a gentle slope. From the top you can see the village laid out like a quiet map. The thatched roofs glow softly in the light, the thin line of smoke from the tavern rising like a thread. Beyond it, the dark shape of the forest stands still, and deep a reminder of how much of this land remains untamed. You sit on a flat rock and listen. There is a stillness here that feels wider than the space around you. A crow calls from somewhere beyond the fields, and the sound hangs in the air before fading. The breeze carries the faint scent of damp grass and wood smoke, the two smells blending into something that feels like the memory of every quiet morning at once. Since the medieval mind, such a vantage point could be both practical and symbolic. High ground was a place to watch for changes in weather for travelers, on the road for anything that might approach. It was also a space for small moments like this, where the day could be considered before it was stepped into fully. The sun climbs a little higher, warming the side of your face. You think about the people you have met on this quiet journey. The merchant with his spices, the tavern keeper polishing his mugs, the travelers trading cloth and berries for a bowl of stew. They are part of a web that holds the village together, a steady rhythm of exchange and familiarity. In another time, another life, you might have been one of them. The thought makes you smile faintly as you stand and begin walking back toward the village. The path down is easy, and soon the sounds of work grow clearer, the steady thud of an axe in the distance, the splash of water poured into a trough, the creak of a cart rolling slowly down the lane. Life here feels both simple and endlessly layered, each sound and smell carrying its own quiet history. You pass the tavern again, its door open to let out the smell of fresh bread baking inside. The round-faced man from last night is carrying a tray of mugs to a table outside, and he gives you a nod without a word. It is the kind of greeting that says you are part of the day. Now no longer a stranger passing through, but someone who belongs for at least this moment. The sun is warm on your shoulders as you reach the stable once more. The animals are out now, the stalls swept clean, the floor dusted with fresh straw. The ladder to the loft waits in the corner, its familiar creak already part of your memory. You think of climbing up again, just to see the way the light falls through the window, but instead, you step outside and turn toward the lane. The village stretches behind you, but its quiet rhythm seems to follow you like an echo. The smell of wood smoke lingers. The sound of the goat bells drifts faintly on the breeze, and somewhere in the distance a harp is playing a slow tune. It is not loud enough to be certain, but it carries the shape of last night's music, as if the air itself has decided to remember it for you. You walk slowly, letting the day gather around you. Step by step the road ahead is open, the fields on either side green and waking somewhere. Beyond the horizon the world will be louder and faster, but for now, you are here in the unhurried heart of the medieval daith. The candle in your thoughts flickers low. The road softens beneath your feet, and the sky above feels wider now, a pale blue, brushed with drifting clouds. Each breath you take carries the mingled sense of earth and wood smoke, and something warm from the tavern far behind you. The sounds of the village fade until they are only a gentle hum in your memory, and the breeze moves like a slow hand across your shoulders. You feel the weight of the blanket in your mind, the quiet loft, the soft purring of the cat, and they settle around you like a second skin. The day ahead drifts further away, and you let your thoughts grow lighter, looser, as though they too are made of straw and sunlight. Somewhere, the last curl of smoke rises into the sky and disappears, leaving only stillness. You breathe slower now,